China Global Television Network.
Democratic Republic of Congo announces arrest of FDLR leader, marking major progress against rebel groups. Tension between rival sides in South Sudan peace process over detention of Riek Machar. And China slams US bill on Chinese Xinjiang territory, which comes week after a law on Hong Kong. Hello and welcome to CGTN. This is Africa Live and I'm Karen Roberts in Nairobi. Also coming up in the programme. Lifeline for South African Airways as government announces a $272 million boost. And in sports, we take you to Nigeria, where the hospitality sector players are collaborating to grow grassroots football. We have reporters live on locations across the world with the latest at this hour. In Kinshasa, DRC, Chris Ochemringa is following the arrest of a top Rwandese rebel leader. And in Madrid, in Spain, Filio Contrafuri has updates on the UN climate conference there. Africa Live begins now. Up to 57 people have died after a ship from Gambia carrying around 150 migrants sank off the coast of Mauritania on Wednesday. The UN Migration Agency says more than 83 migrants from Gambia survived the shipwreck. However, the number of injured is yet to be confirmed. This incident is one of the deadliest since crossings decreased around 15 years ago when Spain stepped up patrols. The perilous sea passage from West Africa to Europe was once a major route for migrants seeking jobs and prosperity. Although home to some of the continent's fastest growing economies, West Africa is struggling to generate enough jobs for its rapidly growing youth population. Mauritanian authorities could not immediately be reached for comment. The Congolese army has arrested a key Rwandan rebel commander, Nshimiyimana Asifwe, in the eastern city of Goma. That's according to officials who on Wednesday reported that Asifwe was arrested during a military offensive against his outfit, the Democratic Forces for the Liberation of Rwanda rebels, among other groups. Congolese military spokesperson Major Njike Kayiko describes Asifwe as an important figure of the group who will be handed over to Rwanda. His rebel group has suffered a number of setbacks in the DRC in recent months. In September, DRC forces are reported to have killed one commander, while the head of the FDLR's military wing was killed in October. Well, CGTN correspondent Chris Ochemringa joins us live now from Kinshasa. Chris, what more do we know about Asifwe and the circumstances surrounding his arrest?
Well, Nshimiyimana Asifwe was a former soldier in the Rwandan army during the time of former President Juvenal Habyarimana. He's among the Hutu soldiers who fled to the eastern DRC after the Rwandan genocide of 1994 and formed the Democratic Forces for the Liberation of Rwanda, a militia group that has a mission of overthrowing the government of Rwanda. And so he was a senior member, a commander in the army. He's said to be the assistant commander of an elite unit of the FDLR, which has settled in the eastern parts of the DRC of Masisi, Ruchuru, and Kichanga for very many years, and they have carried out a lot of atrocities. Authorities in Goma say that he was arrested in a bar. He was found drinking with some of his friends, and the locals saw him, they identified him, and tipped off the security operatives who pounced on him. They say he will be handed over to Rwandan authorities to face prosecution. Karen?
And Chris, it's been almost a month now of government military offensive against militants there. What further progress has the military reported?
Well, the Congolese army says that they have taken up very many positions that were originally held by the Allied Democratic Forces. This is a Ugandan Islamist group that has been carrying out a lot of atrocities in the Beni territory in eastern DRC. They are saying they are also closing in on them with the support of MONUSCO, that's the UN peacekeeping mission, and they believe that by the end of this year they will have wiped out that group that has caused a lot of killings in DRC.
Okay,
Karen?
Chris Ochemringa there in Kinshasa for us. Thank you very much for that update. Moving on to other news now. World leaders are gathering in Madrid for talks on climate change, and the Chilean representative says countries should pay more attention to the role of oceans in combating global warming. Guy Henderson reports.
Oceans cover more than 70% of the world's surface. They are a massive carbon sink, and therefore you might have thought they would form a central part of any discussion about dealing with the climate change issue. But according to the Chilean presidency of the UN Climate Summit at the moment, they are not being given quite the amount of attention that they should be being given. COP25 aims to change that. We have come to an event on the side of the UN Climate Summit organised by an organisation called Because the Ocean Initiative. The Chilean Minister of Science is here. We caught up with him and I asked him whether he was confident that countries would now begin to include the oceans in their national emissions reduction strategies.
So this is about building coalitions. It's a process, and this is why today this report, together with the IPCC report, what they do is they start building a roadmap so that we can have the topic discussed over and over again until it becomes essential for the entire community. And this is step by step. We have COP25 now, we have the UN Oceans conference in July, and we have COP26 in the UK next year. It's all about building momentum so the topic can gain interest and relevance.
28% of the world's population lives along a coastline, but this is not just a conversation for countries with coastlines, because food supply would be affected by rising sea levels. There would be the knock-on impact that rising sea levels would have on weather patterns, even in landlocked countries. So I think the feeling amongst people at the COP, and certainly amongst the Chilean presidency, is that progress is being made, but there is still a process ahead of them before they can push the oceans up the international political agenda as much as they would like. Guy Henderson, CGTN, Madrid.
We are now joined by our reporter Filio Contrafori, who is in Madrid for us. Filio, a lot of time is likely to be spent on discussions around the Paris Agreement on carbon emissions. Why is this still the focal point?
Well, that's right, and that's mostly because based on all the scientific data and all the reports that have been coming out, the Paris Agreement that was signed 4 years ago, it seems to be off track, and unless some urgent action is taken right now, then it seems that, as we've also heard from UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres saying, it seems that the target of the Paris Agreement will become almost impossible to meet, and that target is all about keeping global warming within 1.5 degrees until the end of the century. And to do that, countries have agreed that greenhouse gas emissions will peak by 2020, and then they will slowly start coming down until there's carbon neutrality until the year 2050. But according to the reports and the data, it seems that the world is not there. So this is basically becoming a race against time. And the Paris Agreement will start getting implemented next year. And that's why we've been hearing all these pleas towards countries that they must renew and make more generous contributions in terms of cutting their greenhouse gas emissions. And they must do it faster. And they need to proceed to more drastic emission cuts if, again, the target of that Paris Agreement is to be met and the agreement stays on track. Karen?
And Filio, what else is coming out of the climate conference?
Well, you know, there's so much going on here, and aside from all the negotiations and the talks that have been taking place behind closed doors, there's a lot of side events, like one that's a day-long event that's taking place right behind me, and it's about youth and future generations. A lot of youth events here today as Madrid is getting ready for the arrival of a teenage climate activist, Greta Thunberg, who will be in Madrid tomorrow to join this massive demonstration in the center of Madrid tomorrow. But other than that, as we've seen in the report from my colleague Guy Henderson, what's interesting here is that there's finally some talk about the role of oceans and the sea ecosystems in terms of climate change. Yesterday there was a very, very interesting report that came out from Greenpeace, the NGO, highlighting the importance of oceans and marine life in the fight against climate change. And we should remember that Chile, even before the conference was moved here to Madrid, had said that this should be a blue COP, where oceans will be one of the main themes. And all this is because of the first ever UN report that was published just a few months ago, and basically said that all people, no matter where they are on Earth, they are dependent directly or indirectly in the oceans. So this conference has been trying to integrate the oceans and the marine ecosystems to make the connection between them and climate change. And according to the Greenpeace report yesterday, they said that if those marine ecosystems that have been ravaged by pollution and human activity are somehow restored, their capacity to absorb heat and store carbon will be increased so much. And we shouldn't forget that oceans are the world's largest carbon sink, and that's something that slowly this conference is trying to highlight, the importance of oceans and marine life. Karen?
Okay, Filio, thank you very much for that. That was Filio Contrafuri there in Madrid following the UN Climate Change Conference taking place there.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Let's now turn to South Sudan, where negotiations between the government and the main opposition movement led by Riek Machar concluded on Wednesday without an agreement on the number of administrative states in the country. The talks failed despite mediation by South Africa's Deputy President David Mabuza. Earlier, Machar's group issued a statement that strongly condemned the regional body IGAD over the alleged detention of its leader in Sudan. It also denounced the call by President Salva Kiir for the immediate relocation of Machar to Juba as a precondition for his release. Well, despite its protests, Machar's opposition movement has pledged its commitment to the peace accord. Well, for more on this, we are now joined live by CGTN's Patrick Oyet, who is in Juba for us. Patrick, what more can you tell us about this latest standoff in the peace process?
Yeah, Karen, the first thing the Deputy President of South Africa, who actually has been acting as a mediator in this process, says is that progress has been made. He says when he came to Juba on Monday this week to mediate in this issue of the number of states, each political party in South Sudan had a different position. But by Wednesday evening when he was leaving, he says that at least they had only two positions. That is, all the opposition groups had one position and the government also had one position, which he says it is now easier to mitigate and ensure that they agree on the number of states. He says the talks are being adjourned and then they would return for more talks in 10 days' time. And they say that he expects that when they meet in 10 days' time, they will resolve the issue of the number of states. Then they will go ahead to resolve any other outstanding issues in this peace deal implementation to pave a way to ensure that in February 2020.
And, oh dear, it appears that we have lost Patrick Oyot there. Apologies for that. We'll try and get back to him a bit later. Let's move on to another story now. Just a week after the United States passed a law on Hong Kong, it's made a similar move on another Chinese territory, the western region of Xinjiang. The House of Representatives passed the act on Tuesday. It would give the US president the power to sanction Chinese officials who are, and I quote, responsible for human rights abuses in Xinjiang and elsewhere. China has reacted strongly.
It's a deeply divided Capitol Hill, it seems, on all issues except China. The vote 407-1. And the bill is a stronger version than what the U.S. Senate passed on Xinjiang a few months ago.
We are sending a message to Beijing. America is watching and we will not stand silent.
However, this statement didn't go down too well on the other side of the world.
It is smearing and slandering China's successful ethnic policy, in particular its Xinjiang policy, in an attempt to poison ethnic relations, undermine Xinjiang's prosperity and stability, and contain China's development.
Beijing went as far as to summon the acting deputy chief of the U.S. Embassy in Beijing over the bill. Meanwhile, multiple government bodies, including the country's top legislature, have issued strong words of condemnation. Xinjiang's local political advisory body said a large number of people and hundreds of police officers have been killed in thousands of terror attacks since the 1990s. Yet it said the U.S. fails to respect this fact and the lives of the people of Xinjiang. China has also slammed America's own human rights records.
The U.S. also conducts forced assimilation of Native Americans, killing, expelling, and persecuting them and denying them their due civil rights. Today, they only account for 2.09% of the total U.S. population. They are facing numerous difficulties.
The Chinese Foreign Ministry also commented on Pelosi's statement about China's Xinjiang measures being, and quote, outrage to the collective conscience of the world.
In recent years, the U.S. used human rights and counterterrorism as a cover to wage wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria, killing millions of innocent civilians and turning more into displaced refugees. Such acts, in total contempt of people's right to life and development, are a real outrage to the collective conscience of the world.
Jing Chao, CGTN.
We are going to a short break now. Don't go away. Lots more to come, including...
If it is going to bring any change to Uganda, well and good. If it isn't going to bring any change, still we don't know what is going to come.
Uganda abuzz after President Yoweri Museveni leads march against corruption. And from DRC back to Central African Republic, another 200 returnees head back home after 6 years as refugees.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Let's now head over to Uganda, where President Yoweri Museveni led a walk against corruption on Wednesday. Thousands of participants joined him over a 3-kilometre route in the capital, Kampala. Here's CGTN's Leon Esenyange with more.
A city on lockdown, Uganda's capital Kampala took a different form as people gathered for the anti-corruption walk. The chief walker, President Yoweri Museveni. With every step and with thousands behind him was the hope of ending corruption.
The laws are in place. I don't think there is any law we have not put on the statute books. The problem is with the implementation. And I think the mistake was in the recruitment. Don't recruit people there on the basis of paper qualifications. Recruit people on the basis of integrity.
According to the 2018 Corruption Perceptions Index reported by Transparency International, which looked at 175 countries, Uganda is the 149th least corrupt. But it's determined to stamp out all forms of corruption. Thousands have turned up for the corruption walk, among them the Chief Justice and top government officials. But these officials' institutions have seen corruption scandals in the past. So many are asking, will the walk change anything? On the streets, people were not convinced it will help.
I don't think walking alone can take corruption out of Uganda. We have to take so much strict measures to reduce corruption, especially getting the individuals.
If it is going to bring any change to Uganda, well and good. If it isn't going to bring any change, still we don't know what is going to come.
Corruption is still on the rise, you know. Walking alone might not be sufficient. They should put in place other measures as well to help to curb the corruption.
The Uganda government has acknowledged that corruption is one of the main challenges facing the country and is calling for a collective effort to find solutions.
Do not wait to be anything else or anybody else to fight against corruption. It starts with me, it starts with you. Don't wait to be the president of this country to start fighting corruption. That's a lie. The struggle to fight corruption starts from where you are and what you do.
According to the Uganda Revenue Authority, the country loses over $50 billion annually in government fraud. The Presidential State House Anti-Corruption Unit has, however, had some success. It recently banned over 70 officials from public office. More than 100 others have been charged. While President Museveni has talked the talk on corruption, getting everybody to walk the talk still remains the bigger challenge. Leon Sanyange, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Well, let's find out more about this anti-corruption march led by President Yoweri Museveni. We have Sisi Kagaba joining us live from Kampala. She's the Executive Director of Anti-Corruption Coalition Uganda. Thank you very much for joining us, Sisi. What do you make of the President leading an anti-graft march against his own government?
I think we can't walk corruption out of a country. And if the president decides to walk, then he's becoming an activist. Because if you're the president and you're working against a vice that is within your same government, then it defeats the purpose. The walk, I think, to me, was just a mockery. And the walk was merely a ritual to commemorate the International Anti-Corruption Week. And I think, like the president rightly said, that we have the laws in place and the issue is enforcement. We need to understand that our president is the chief executive officer of government. He appoints those that are holding high positions in government, and he has failed to actually take action against some of those people. So if you see a president decide to work against corruption, then I think there is something terribly wrong. The issue is we need to see action and not walking.
So, Sissy, you see this as a bit of a stunt then. How do you see this turn of events impacting on government officials on the one hand and on ordinary Ugandans on the other?
Obviously, it's not going to impact because even the officials themselves know nothing is going to be taken, no action is going to be taken. Because you realize that most of the people that were working were government officials. These are public servants, the same public servants that have actually been implicated by the same government entities. Because we have an example, we have the Auditor General. The Auditor General audits government entities and does produce reports. Now, the interesting bit is that the Auditor General's recommendations are hardly taken up by the same government officials that were marching yesterday against corruption. So, as an ordinary person, we don't really see the work yielding anything. The work can only yield anything if we see action. But if it is work, the work is more of the usual rhetoric that our government has continuously been talking about when it comes to issues of corruption.
Sissy, can you give me a few more details about the nature of this official corruption? How does it happen? And how does it affect the Ugandan economy?
The biggest levels of corruption in the country is procurement. You're going to have people who do not have experience, but because they know people that are within the system, they're going to be given a huge procurement deals. And in the process, you're going to realize there's a lot of shoddy work. As a country, we lose billions of shillings through procurement. Then the other form of corruption that we have is commercialization of politics. You have politicians who continuously bribe people in order to vote for them. And then you're going to have what you'd call judicial corruption, people paying for services within the justice system that they should actually not be paying for. So that and more other different forms actually form a hybrid. And when you look at economic terms, yes, there are huge levels of grand corruption. Look at the anti-corruption court and the various cases that they continuously handle. Now, interestingly enough, some of the cases that are before the courts of law, especially grand corruption cases, these are people that are high up within the system, and huge amounts of money are lost on a daily basis, but we hardly see any form of action.
Okay, thank you very much for your analysis. That was Sissy Kagaba there speaking to us from Kampala in Uganda on the anti-corruption march there led by President Yoweri Museveni. A fourth group of Central African refugees have returned from exile in the Democratic Republic of Congo. The returnees were received by the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, Filippo Grandi, during an official visit to the country. The group are part of the first ever voluntary repatriation program from DR Congo for around 172,000 people forcibly displaced from the Central African Republic since 2013.
200 passengers are part of the fourth group of Central African refugees on a final boat trip back home to the Central African Republic. They are returning from exile in the Democratic Republic of Congo for the first time in 6 years. They had fled violence and upsurges of civil conflict that erupted in 2013.
I have come back to my country, and now my hope is that my country can look after me. We are many, and there are young children. We are vulnerable. We want the government to come to our aid.
Through the voluntary repatriation agreement signed in July between the governments of the two countries and the United Nations Refugee Agency, they're now going back.
In this moment, when we see refugees returning, we must remember that there are still many internally displaced in this country, and they too deserve the help of international assistance as well as support from their own government. And there are also hundreds of thousands of refugees on the other side of this river, and also in Congo-Brazzaville, in Cameroon, in Chad, and in other countries who are also waiting for their day of return.
Over 1,400 have returned so far, as the UNHCR has been assisting in voluntary repatriation from the DRC since 2013. Hundreds more have returned from Cameroon and the Republic of Congo. In the last 3 years, UNHCR has assisted the return of 13,500, and it is estimated that 127,000 have returned spontaneously in the hope that peace will last.
My fear of the situation that unsettled the country can happen again, and we won't have the strength to face it. Let us hope our children have returned to an atmosphere of peace.
Returning refugees are provided with transport and a return package consisting of food rations for 3 months, cash and basic household items to help them settle in once they're back home in the Central African Republic. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
To South Africa now, where the exchange mechanism on the experience of governance between China and Africa has now been launched. Under that mechanism, the two sides plan to organise thematic seminars, joint research projects, conduct training programmes and co-publish research outcomes. The mechanism was launched at the conclusion of a symposium hosted by the South African Human Science Research Council and the China-Africa Institute in Pretoria. CGTN's Yolisa Njumela filed this report.
Key issues such as building governance capacity, urbanization and social policies necessary to address challenges related to poverty, inequality and unemployment were put on the spotlight here. Government officials, renowned experts and scholars from across the continent and from China are also here to share their views and observations about state governance and socio-economic development. The gathering is meant to enhance and facilitate exchanges and cooperation between Chinese and African institutions. Senior officials from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences shared their knowledge on success of governance in China.
A Chinese political system provides the guarantee to safeguard the rights of the people and also the concentration the rights of the government. And this system can provide the social rights of the people, and the political system provide the regulations for people so that it could be formed that people will have their expectations, and that will encourage and motivate all the people to get involved into the production and be active and to be proactive.
The Chinese public institutions were hailed as excellent examples of good governance.
It is clear that strong and efficient institutions matter in the implementation of efficient and effective public policy. Once your institutions become weak and inefficient, you will not be able to realize the kind of public policy outcomes that you are looking for.
All experts here agree that 4IR should be integrated in all efforts of dealing with state governance challenges.
The need here is for us to create capacity for public policy officers to solve public problems through the use of 4IR technologies. The intention is simply just to provide insights into the opportunities that require the use of these technologies. How then do we as Africans prepare and apply technologies that fundamentally change the way many services are designed in Africa and how they are delivered?
From here on, the two sides will organize thematic seminars, joint research projects, conduct training programs, and co-publish research outcomes on a continuous basis. Yolisa Njumela for CGTN in Pretoria, South Africa.
All the business news coming up for you after the break, including Lifeline for South African Airways as government announces a $272 million boost. And OPEC looks at ways to manage oil production as demand drops.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
South African Airways is likely to get a $136 million boost from the government and another $136 million from existing lenders. On Thursday, the airline entered business rescue proceedings. The extra funds will be provided for in a, and I quote, fiscally neutral manner, with the full recovery of capital and interest on existing debt not impacted by the rescue proceedings. In a business rescue process, a specialist administrator takes control of a company with the aim of rehabilitating it to improve its chance of survival. The embattled airline has not made any profit since 2011 and has been dependent on government bailouts. It suffered an employee strike last month that forced it to cancel hundreds of flights, which further pushed it to the brink of collapse. Uganda plans to borrow $661 million from international banks to plug a hole in its 2019-2020 budget. This is after domestic revenue collections fell short by 9% amid delays in implementation of some planned tax-generating measures. The move could heighten concerns about Uganda's growing debt pile. The International Monetary Fund has warned that the country's debt could likely surpass 50% of gross domestic product in 2021 to 2022. The country's financial year starts in July. According to documents published by the Finance Ministry, Uganda plans to borrow the money from a local unit of South Africa's Standard Bank and Regional Trade Development Bank. OPEC is expected to discuss ways to manage its oil production for the coming year in a meeting at its headquarters in Vienna on Thursday. The organization has been considering ways to stabilize the market amidst falling oil prices due to decreased demand. As 2020 approaches, OPEC also faces a number of other challenges. With more details, here's CGTN's Natalie Carney reporting now from Vienna.
When oil-producing countries first established OPEC nearly 6 decades ago, they were essentially the only players in town. But a lot has changed since 1960. Today, the production of crude oil by the companies themselves and the discovery of shale oil has reduced OPEC's share of the world's oil supply from 70% to roughly 25%.
What has changed, the nature and the business altogether in the last 10 years, was the emergence of shale oil. Because shale oil is a kind of production that is more short-term in terms of investment cycle. You can very quickly switch on and switch off the production. And that was a challenge for OPEC.
The U.S., a non-OPEC member, has increased its production of shale oil to an average of 12.4 million barrels a day, reducing the dependency on imports while also adding to the export market. The U.S.-China trade dispute is also a threat to oil prices in general.
The dispute between US and China has a big impact on the global growth. Yeah? The oil demand growth is slowing down because the global trade is slowing down. And all that is a problem because obviously when oil demand is not growing, but on the other side supply is growing, yeah? That's not good for prices.
In July, OPEC members extended their production cuts of 1.2 million barrels per day for a further 9 months in an effort to ward off tumbling prices. And it is expected that the organization will further extend those cuts, retaining production targets through 2020 at this week's meeting.
While these cuts attempt to balance and stabilize the market, some smaller OPEC members are affected more adversely. Qatar left the organization at the beginning of 2019, and Ecuador is expected to do the same in January to pursue their own oil policies. Yet despite the challenges, many believe OPEC remains a relevant organization.
I believe strongly that OPEC is a cooperation of sovereign countries, and these countries have agreed to work together. And I think that is the basis. Then that's the success OPEC has recorded over the years. And I wouldn't agree that OPEC is dying. If there are 24 countries committed to working together, and if those countries are still committed to that cooperation, I don't see where death is coming in that area.
Look, OPEC is relevant, and OPEC has a good job that they're doing.
OPEC members could implement further oil production cuts in the near future. Yet as long as prices remain moderate and stable, investment into more costly shale oil will decrease, a trend that would likely play out favorably for OPEC.
Meanwhile, Saudi Aramco is expected to announce the share prices of its highly anticipated IPO today. Its book runners have recommended the oil giant go with $8.5 per share, the top of an indicative price range. That could mean Aramco having a market valuation of $1.7 trillion, comfortably overtaking Apple as the world's most valuable listed firm. The deal is the centerpiece of the Saudi Crown Prince's plans to diversify the economy away from its reliance on oil. To Kenya now, where the country's coffee sector is looking to rebound following a tumultuous year. 2018 and 2019 saw a 13% drop in production, and as CGTN's Robert Nagila reports, the decline has been attributed to a number of factors, including falling global prices.
This is one of the busiest streets in downtown Nairobi. Outdoor market, bus terminus and the central railway station also in the vicinity. But unknown to many, it is also the nerve center for coffee in the country.
On the second floor of Wakulima House,
this is where we do the sampling of coffee.
Daniel Mbivi, the CEO of Nairobi's Coffee Exchange, shows me where the country's coffee is displayed for traders.
The coffee buyers have already collected about 250 grams, a size like this one, to go and do their own quality analysis from their labs. Because they can only be able to understand what they're coming to buy by doing the quality analysis.
Kenya is Africa's 5th largest coffee producing country. The country mainly produces Arabica coffee, but 2019 has been a tough year for the sector. Coffee production in 2019-2020 is projected to drop to 650,000 bags, the lowest production in 50 years. This is mainly due to drought, low global prices and high production of Arabica in Brazil. But the country has some of the best quality coffee, highly sought after, which sells at a premium. And the sector is beginning to see early signs of a rebound.
We are now picking so well, more smiles. From last week's auction, things are showing up, and I'm anticipating a better thing next week.
An early Christmas present for the farm. Okay.
But the volumes are low again.
The decline in output is partly attributed to farmers dumping coffee for other crops due to poor governance of Kenya marketing cooperatives and a marketing structure that forces farmers to shoulder a large amount of risk.
This is where the auction takes place. This is the auction hall.
Every Tuesday, traders gather here to bid for Kenya's coffee.
So once the USCT is enabled, then you can be able to bid.
Of course, the highest bidder wins. But the sector also faces challenges. Farmers require significant support from government. Many produce on average of 2 kilograms of cherries from a bush that can produce at least 30 kilograms. These and other factors has seen its production significantly drop. Robert Nagila, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
We're going to a short break now. Don't go away. Lots more to come, including a startup in Nigeria seeks to bridge the gap between doctors without offices and patients in need of professional services.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Imagine being a healthcare professional without your own healthcare facility. Well, in Nigeria, a healthcare startup is providing consultation and treatment facilities for rent. Doctura, as it is called, provides a platform for people to find and book private healthcare professionals, bridging the gap between medical practitioners and patients. Here's Deji Badmus with more on that.
The idea is some kind of revolution in Nigeria's health sector. Doctura also allows health professionals to rent fully serviced medical facilities on a pay-per-use basis after a verification process. In turn, it takes a commission of the fees paid across the platform. Founded by medical doctor and healthcare consultant Debo Dulana in 2016, Doctura aggregates the spare capacity in private hospitals to provide foreign and local practitioners with the ability to deliver services without incurring setup costs.
With Doctura, a doctor can easily book a place to use in any of our locations and see the patients whenever they need to see the patients at these locations. What this does is it allows foreign-based professionals and the ones that are based in Nigeria also move around within the country to deliver services.
Currently operational in 3 cities in Nigeria, Doctura works with facilities in 30 different locations. Ultimately, the aim is to create the kind of service that equates to the ones that people often seek abroad.
$1.3 billion is being spent by averagely 50,000 people on medical treatments abroad. We are losing money. Some of the money we are losing can be returned. So if we can bring professionals in to the country or aggregate the professionals in the country that have the skills, we can deliver that value and reduce the amount of money we are losing.
In one of its centers, Doctura has successfully conducted 169 kidney transplant surgeries. And Dr. Debo believes achievements like that can gradually revive the lost confidence in the Nigerian healthcare system.
At this center where we've done a lot of kidney transplant surgeries, we've also noticed that most of the time there are very empty rooms in that facility. So how can we take this underutilized extra capacity and use it to create more services for people who would otherwise not have access to healthcare?
Over 187 vetted health and wellness professionals have signed up on the platform, and there's really no limit to the kind of service that can be found on Doctura. Here, a patient is being attended to by one of the doctors signed to the platform. The board explained how the Doctura platform has been of help to them.
If I were to float a clinic now, I'll be looking for huge sums of money. You need to pay rent, you need to buy equipment, all of that. But they have come into the sector now to say, okay, come, we have facilities, just come, see your patients, collect your money, pay us a certain amount, and everybody goes home fine.
Bringing this initiative, bringing this platform, making me book whenever I want, making me see the doctor I want, it's a welcome initiative. Just come, see a doctor, and then at your convenience, there's no rush, and that's the wonderful thing about it.
The fact that Doctura essentially brings the doctor to the patient and not the other way around, as is usually the case, is quite innovative. And in offering this kind of service, Doctura is not just increasing the clientele of medical professionals, but also reducing the rate at which healthcare workers leave the country. DJ Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
All the sports news coming up for you after the break, including... We take you to Nigeria, where the hospitality sector players are collaborating to grow grassroots football.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
Let's begin at the East African Safari Classic Rally, where Sweden's Stig Blomqvist set the pace on day 7 to take a comfortable lead in Tanga, Tanzania. Blomqvist, driving a Tuthill Porsche 911, snatched the lead from second-placed Austrian Chris Rosenberger